Well, happy whatever day that you're watching us. This is Richard Rosen for Green Burial, Manitoba. We thank you for joining us today and hope you've poured yourself a fresh cup of whatever you want to enjoy the next 20 minutes or so with our guest for today. A little bit about Green Burial Manitoba. It is a relatively new organization launched as a Facebook page in February 2021. And it's here to bring awareness, resources, and support to those who want to learn about green burial or to enhance what they already know and learn more about what's going on in our province. And also to give you an opportunity to help us get the word out about what green burial is in your own communities and support what we're doing here in our province and across the country. And so with that, we will now head into our interview. With us today, we have a special guest from Winnipeg, Rick Zerbe Cornelsen, the Village Casketmaker. Rick, welcome, and thank you for joining us here today.
Thank you, Richard.
We've known each other a long time. It's been 20 plus years that I remember walking into your shop in Fort Rouge in Winnipeg, and just being absolutely enamored by all of the stuff that you're doing and how you come to do what you do. And your story is wonderful. So maybe just give us a bit of a sense of how you actually became the Village Casketmaker.
Thanks, Richard. I was also recalling the fact that you were among the very first funeral directors to take interest in what I was doing and support it and encourage me along that path. You know, the story goes way back, and I'll try to be brief, but it really is rooted in the fact that I was born into a family of people who loved working with wood and who were fairly practically minded, I guess, and thought things through in matter of fact and sensible terms. And when I was still a kid, I'm the youngest of five sons and a father who also loved woodworking. And while I was still a kid, one of my older brother's friends became a funeral director, and he talked about the cost of caskets and the markup that his funeral home put on the caskets. And so initially the conversations around our dinner table had to do with, somebody could just build some simpler caskets and make them in a workshop and sell them to families directly. Initially, I think the idea was mostly about saving somebody some money and offering simpler alternatives. And, as a kid, I just sort of absorbed this conversation and this idea, and it took root and kind of hung around, and during several other mini careers of mine, it remained an idea in the background. And then when my father retired, not long after he retired, he decided to make caskets, one for himself and one for my mother, and just store them in the attic of his garage. And that was sometimes the subject of a little bit of humor within the family. But when we used one of those for my mother in 2001, it was a beautiful, wholesome experience to see her in something that my father had made out of reclaimed materials. And at that point, I happened to be at a stage in my life where I was looking at a change, and I decided to finally hang out my shingle and just say, here I am, I'm going to make some relatively simple caskets, and if someone wants to use them, they will be available. And I still remember the very first phone call I got. I was doing a carpentry job for someone else, and then my cell phone rang, and it was someone who heard about this and wanted to use one of my caskets. And it suddenly went from being a theoretical possibility to a real one. So that was probably 17, 18 years ago already. And it has remained a part-time business for me, but I love doing it. And I find a lot of satisfaction, not only in the craft, but also in the interactions with families who are willing to think creatively or step outside the mainstream system a little bit and purchase something that's locally built and relatively simple.
Yeah, and I've seen your products coming through over the period of years where families have said we've already arranged our casket through you. And for me as a funeral director, the biggest thing is to ensure that what families are ordering and getting, bringing into the funeral home, have value and have quality. And we've seen internet purchases and them being shipped, and you look at them, oh, they look like they've been around the moon and back 4 times. And whenever I hear that it's your product, I never worry, because it's always it's a labor of love for you, and I know that. So that's one of those great things that we know about you in our industry here in Manitoba, that when we know it's your casket, we know it's always good quality, and it's just, and we get to see you sometimes too, because you will deliver. So that's always good.
Well, I appreciate that. And I do remember in the early days, especially, there were, and legitimately so, there were questions raised by funeral directors. I usually heard it through the families that I was dealing with, that they questioned whether this guy knows what he's doing and whether the product would serve its purpose well. And I often, and this has been because it is a difficult marketing path, if you will. People do have to make an extra step in order to come to me and get my products. I tend to overbuild them so that I can assure people that these will indeed serve their purpose well, and we've never had any problems, and there's generally a lot of acceptance amongst funeral homes. They want to do what the best or what the families wish for, and that's everyone's goal.
Right. So you, there was something in your thinking somewhere along the way that green burial and the whole idea of natural, being more natural, and had come into your thoughts. So tell us a little bit about that journey for you.
That is a good question. The conversation first started in my family around sort of cost and simplicity, and those aren't unrelated to natural values, but it was really the lag time between when the idea first germinated in my mind and when I actually began to do this. Everyone's consciousness had been raised around environmental issues, and so in the early 2000s, then when I started working at this, I was already reading about natural burial, especially in places like the UK, and so it became part of my thinking simply through the reading and so on. And it really did make sense in conjunction with my emphasis on relative simplicity, that what I was going to try to offer was not alternative extravagant caskets, but rather relatively simple ones that might not be as readily available in the general marketplace. And that very easily became then, or then led to an emphasis on natural materials as well. I appreciate some of the possibilities of natural burial. Some of my other work has had to do with property development, and I'm quite aware that land use issues are relevant to the funeral industry, and that's why cremation has become so popular. But part of me still likes cemeteries. I like
Mhm.
the idea that our society sets aside spaces for remembering those who have died, and just creating green space that way. And natural burial is a way to set land aside in a way that is even more eco-friendly than the conventional cemeteries, and can generate some revenue for landowners that does not require other forms of development that might be more harmful environmentally. So I really am attracted to that aspect of natural burial as well, along with the fact that we, at the end of life, it makes a lot of sense, especially if you've been concerned with pollution and environmental concerns all your life. It makes sense to do the best you can with your body at the end of life as well,
Mhm.
and not add more toxins to the earth. So that's generally speaking um, how I came to be interested in natural burial.
Mm. Yeah, you touch on something that struck me as I was developing my own thoughts about green burial, was that the living environmental organizations like Green Action Center here in Winnipeg and some of the other environmental organizations all over the place, they focus on the living things, composting and recycling, and being careful of your lights, turning them off, and having a worldwide day to turn your lights out, and have a zero emission day or a period of time. But there's one more thing to do, and your environmental stewardship of the planet and your carbon footprint doesn't stop when your heart does. There is that one more thing, and environmental organizations are starting to understand, I think, that green burial and all of the things that we as a movement are trying to positively bring to folks is also a message that they should be sharing with their people as well, that are following the living environmental organizations, to say, we don't really need to get into a whole bunch of stuff, but your environmental legacy is important, and here's some organizations that you should be looking at. And that's one of those outreaches I think that's important for green burial movements across the planet to be considering, is to partner with the living environmental organizations. One of the products that you started with was the Timberwise, and so we'll do the screen share, and this gets into your design and your thought process. So let's just do this quick screen share here.
When I initially began building caskets, I did start with something that looks a little more conventional than this. I needed to kind of bridge the gap between what was available in the funeral homes and what I thought I could make well, and so on. So I was using veneered oak plywood and some solid oak as well, and also I made some pine boxes. But in all cases, there is glue and metal involved, and precious hardwoods that do have an environmental impact in terms of their use if we use them too much. So as I was doing that over the first few years, and learning more about natural burial, I was constantly wondering how I could improve my construction techniques. And in fact, I did things on my other casket models that improved the environmental qualities of them, but I always wanted to kind of do the ultimate, in my mind, casket that still looked like a casket. There are of course other alternatives, shrouds and things like that, but I wanted to design something that really had a very low environmental footprint. And oddly enough, while I was standing in a bookstore in Winnipeg here and reading a book about the local Red River Métis settlers and the kinds of log houses they used to build, their unique design technique or construction technique grabbed my attention, and I wondered, a house and a casket are kind of similar in the sense that they're basically boxes that need to be structurally sound and held together at corners and things like that. And so I began to dream about using slotted corner posts and dowels to hold the whole structure together. And so what you're looking at now is the end product, which I call TimberWise Zero, and because I think it uses wood in a wise way, in a sustainable way, and because it contains zero glue and zero metal. It's all held together by either dowels or slots into which tongue and groove boards fit, and then rope. There are rope handles along the bottom, you can see, and they are individual loops, but also connected together, so they both carry the weight of the whole casket and help to keep it all together. And so this casket is relatively light. All of the structural strength is in the rails and the posts, and so if the side boards that fill those gaps are relatively thin and have no structural function, so they don't need to be glued together or fastened in there. They are just slotted loose into the posts. And so that's been, if a family comes to me and wants to either do a natural burial in the way that we're now discussing, or just wants to ensure that their conventional burial has fewer impacts on the environment, then they might choose this particular option.
So how has your response been to this particular casket, or even if you want to speak to what's the response about green burial from your point of view?
Well, it's interesting. This casket, I've had polar opposite responses from different people about it. I will have people come and look at it and say, "That's beautiful," and what I believe what they're saying is they're acknowledging the innovation of trying to assemble something in this way, in a way that doesn't involve glue, especially, and metals, and that there's somehow a functionality that they consider to be aesthetically pleasing as well, and they like the natural wood and so on. On the other hand, I once made a presentation to a group that was discussing these kinds of sustainable options for living in various ways, but on this particular night they were discussing how we deal with human bodies after they die. And so I brought one of these caskets into the room and had it on display, and I made a little speech, and the host, who was leading the question and answer time, started one question to me with, "So how do you feel when people tell you that this thing is ugly?" And and I was a little taken aback, but his point was, and it's a real one, this casket does not look like your typical glossy, solid hardwood or metal casket that you'll find in a funeral home. There's no doubt about that. And so I'm always careful to say to people, if you want something that's a little more, I don't know, rustic, rudimentary looking, but has a really low environmental impact, then this might be for you. And I've sold a good number of them, and they were not for expressly natural burial purposes. And in fact, in some cases, it was just people who just liked the idea of that simple pine box and chose this one. And in one case, I had a gentleman come back to me a couple of years later. Sadly, he had need of another casket within his family. And he told me that when his wife had been buried in one of these, he had purchased it without a single thought to the sort of eco-friendly question. And it wasn't a big factor in his own thinking at the time, but he said he had gotten so many comments about it, and almost everybody commented on that aspect of it, and that had kind of raised his consciousness as well about this.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, I've had a variety of reactions, and it usually is not met with a neutral kind of response.
Yeah, and to that point of what the fellow said, you should have said it's awfully comfortable. Maybe you should just lay down in it for eternity or something. But this is what caskets look like. This is what we would have anticipated. Our grandparents, our forebears would have seen something like this. The local cabinet maker, or the person who knew one end of a hammer from the other, was the one that made the pine box and provided it for the community, because that's just what you did, and it was kept simple, and it was exactly along these sorts of lines. So now let's talk about what you and I did. So we'll just before I show the picture, last year I had 3 green burials, and the families were very specific. They didn't want a casket per se, but what they wanted was part of what they had seen and understood that green burial also can be, where there is no casket, but there is a carrier tray that is used, and the body is kept in their natural state, wrapped in a shroud, carried to the grave, and buried. And I had to scramble because there was nothing that I could find in Winnipeg at any of the local casket distributors. And I got fed up, and I just used an air tray, which was just the plywood tray with nylon straps to place the body on that our industry uses to ship caskets. And so Rick and I had a conversation. He makes fine coffee, and we sat in his kitchen, and we based a Timberwise carrier tray upon part of this casket, and that's what we came up with. So do you want to tell us a little bit about its design and how it's being used?
Yeah, and this is a fairly natural and relatively simple way to adapt that design from the actual casket, because, as I said before, all the structural strength in the complete casket is in the rails and then the posts, and so because the handles, even on the full size casket, are low down, they actually cradle underneath the casket, and all of the weight bearing strength is right along that rail. But this tray does exactly what you suggested. It bears the weight and cradles the body, but then the body can be just in a shroud, and then this allows for the lowering and so on of the body into the grave. And it really is just a modification of the base of the original Timberwise Zero casket. But I do the inner floor of it a little more carefully and keep the rope on the underside so that it looks aesthetically a little more pleasing when it's being used, especially if it's in some sort of a public service. But yeah, it's all doweled together at the corners, and then the floorboards are slotted into the side walls, and also doweled in to keep the walls equidistant from each other. And then the rope goes underneath and bears all of the weight.
Well, we're getting close to the end of our time here together, Rick. I thank you. I thank you for all that you've done with providing really good quality products for under difficult circumstances. And I know that you're meeting these folks under the same circumstances that we do. So we appreciate all of that you've done. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Richard, and thank you for thinking creatively within the whole realm of funeral services. I think this is there are many aspects to death care that come together in this idea of natural burial, and I'm excited. I like offering my particular slice of the conversation, but I look forward to seeing what others bring to this as well.
Well, thanks, Rick, for everything. Just a quick question. How does somebody get a hold of you if they have any questions or want to purchase any of your products?
Well, my phone is always very close by. It's 204-228-4741. And I do have a website, and a lot of people like to look at my products before they even make the first call, and which I appreciate, at www.thevillagecasketmaker.com.
So that pretty much wraps up everything here for today. Thank you for everybody who's watched, and I thank everyone who posts comments and questions. We are always looking for topics to discuss. And so if anyone out there has anybody that you think that I should be talking to interview, please forward their name to me through the social media link that you're watching this on. On behalf of Green Burial Manitoba, I thank you. Keep safe and keep smiling, and take care.